The outer extremes of the bas-relief show Cleopatra the Seventh, Philopatoras, which is just here. Oops, there we go. There we go. Ruler, Lady of the Two Lands, and her son Ptolemy Caesar, represented as a fully grown man. They are both performing ritual acts before the gods of Dendera. Cleopatra, like all Egyptian queens before her, displays her ancient rank by wearing the headdress of the queen and mother of gods, Hathor-Isis, and is by equivalence her earthly embodiment, queen and mother of kings. As Ptolemy is mirrored by the child gods Ihi and Halsontus on the other side, if we remember, it can be inferred that he is still at the dawn of his infancy and largely shadowed by and dependent on the supreme matriarch, Cleopatra, who is ruling the empire alone. The house of incarnation at Philae, also known as the Memesium, or birthhouse, is also a late representation of Egyptian religious ideology, and here ideas concerning divine birth and their importance for pharaonic succession lie deeply embedded in the ancient matriarchal stratum. We can see that here. Now, the king is a manifestation of the sun on earth, and his birth from the uterus of the Great Mother Goddess. His life and his subsequent return to her womb upon death are described by hymns etched on the temple walls and bas-reliefs in the birthhouse. In the lowest depiction, which we can see here, Isis is enclosed in a sanctuary which displays the paradisal perfection between mother and the embryonic conscious of the child. So here. The central relief shows Isis Galactotrophusa, the milk-giving mother, feeding her child the milk of life in the presence of the solar god Horus the Elder. There we go, that's Horus, and that's Isis Galactotrophusa feeding her child milk. Here, the ascendance of consciousness is represented, where the ego has identified not only its mother, Isis, but also itself, represented by Horus the Elder. The king is shown indulging in traditional ritual acts where he makes offerings to this eternal image. So that's the king there. Oops, there we go, that's the king. Noteworthy is the reflection of the same image in both central plates, implying the ego's self-awareness and acknowledgement of its own autonomy through the discrimination of opposites. It's actually quite, if we look at this one, is quite the same as that one. Identical just about. The relief on the top right-hand corner shows the mother's sovereignty over the developing ego as the child is still suckled by Isis in its adolescent form. There we go. The mistress of raw records, the goddess Sheshut, is shown writing down the years of life, which stresses the sadness ruling over the child's existence after its separation from the Great Mother. That's Sheshut, who writes the years of the child's life, quite the same way that the Fates record the lifespan, or records the lifespan of humans in Greek cosmogony. On the top left-hand relief, the cycle of Genesis is concluded with Osiris Onofris. Here he is. The deceased king offering the Egyptian crowns to the fully grown Horus. Okay. The independent masculine ego in the presence of his mother, who sits there. The process is now complete. Regeneration of a new Horus king from the deceased Osiris king has occurred through the womb of the eternal matriarch who takes and brings forth life. Isis Medeionimos. Continuity of life, victory over death, and life after death are the messages of salvation that Osiris and Isis, or Hathor, offer, and the ceremonies that venerate the Isiac passion of searching for and conceiving Horus from her dead husband's body, her sorrow and her subsequent triumph over evil penetrate the souls of innumerable people who, in their hope for eternal life, are persuaded into believing that the cult is relaying information literally. In addition, the cosmopolitan appeal of these cults is set in mysteries and sacraments mentioned in ancient ritual texts, the primary one being the great secret of transformation that is handed from the father Osiris to his son Horus. Although the cult of Isis spreads in partnership with the cult of Osiris, or Serapis, as he was known in Hellenistic times, Looks a bit like Poseidon there. Together with their child Hathor-Isis, it was she who retains the dominant role. The kernel of the Hathor-Isis archetype, which is the cultural canon of the highest values in its time, is the consciousness of being the seed of life. A woman's awareness of her own function as beginner, nurturer, and medium for life to accomplish its means, and it is through her that people can relate to the world, to nature, and to life itself. It is during the Ptolemaic period, from about 332 BC onwards, that she undergoes Hellenization. And here we can see a very Hellenistic-looking Isis. Though some texts actually say that this is Cleopatra Selene, who is Cleopatra's daughter. Was Cleopatra's daughter. And it is through Alexandria, the most deeply cultured home of learning in the world at that point in time, that this Egyptian goddess with a Greek persona is able to spread via the sea trade to the traditional centers of Greek worship, which include Delos, Delphi, and Eleusis. Her conquests range from Arabia and Asia Minor in the east to Portugal and Great Britain in the west. And here we have a map which shows, well, the black dots actually show where the cult of Isis went. There's a lot around, well, obviously in Egypt, her home, and spread to Greece, Italy, even up to Britain, Gaul. She went everywhere. The Isiac cult reaches the pinnacle of its influence in the 2nd century CE, when Rome becomes the center of its worship. To the cult's dismay, a new shift of values begins in the early centuries after the birth of Christ, and with the gradual decay of the ancient matriarchal stratum comes the emergence and subsequent dominance of a patriarchal standpoint in the consciousness of Western civilization. Christianity is a religion which is embedded strongly in the solar spiritual consciousness of the patriarchate, developing under the cultural canon of the Isiac cult. The forms, titles, symbols, rites, and ceremonies associated with Isis and the infant Horus are incorporated in the Virgin Mary and the babe Jesus, who break down the former, becoming tangible and conscious as new content in the collective unconscious. And we can see that over here. There's a very, very early version of the Virgin Mary. And I believe the first depiction of Mary is in the catacombs of Priscilla. And that's, here we go, the Virgin Mary and Jesus. The mother archetype, as a dynamic entity in the psychic substratum, retains its abstraction, but it assumes a different style, one that is subordinate to the supreme patriarch. The enandrodromia, which means a similarity in core values between the cult of Isis and that of Christianity, becomes clearly identifiable. Wherever Isis goes, Christianity surely follows, showing that there is no longer a place for the Isiac cult in this world after a new constellation of the mother archetype is concretized and expressed by the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is the source of all psychic creation, whether it be religious or social, and manifests itself through consciousness, becoming visible through the art of its time. After Christianity is proclaimed the official religion of the Roman Empire, Emperor Justinian is swayed by both political agenda and personal hatred of paganism, and elects to put an end to the worship of Isis and the gods of her company, namely Hathor and Osiris, at Philae in 551 CE. This decree ends 3,500 years of secular worship of the Great Mother in Western civilization. The worship of the Great Mother in Western civilization is of great antiquity. She is the principle of nature and humanity's connectedness, relatedness to, and dependence upon it. As an unconscious force, all life is subjugated by her, as all things that stand in the light of ego consciousness are childlike in comparison to the darkness. The earth and its seasonal transformation, as creative aspect of the feminine, entombs the secret of the deeper and original form of conception and generation upon which all life is based. In ancient Egypt, Hathor's cosmic functions are so expanded that she comes to be seen as a personification of the female principle, a role she shares with Isis, and from the New Kingdom the two goddesses merge and their iconography and functions become confounded. The cult dates to the pre-dynastic period, and its origin most likely Sudan. As the hermaphroditic Ouroboros, she exhibits both positive and negative elementary and anima transformative characteristics by which the ego reaches self-consciousness or is dissipated. Death itself she never suffers. As the house of Horus, she is the sky in which he is born. As the sun, yet she is also the cow of the western mountain, the devourer of the dead. As tree of heaven, she encloses the green lower form of Osiris, and it is through her tree branches that he is reborn as the supernal sun god Ra. Her hermaphroditic nature is also seen in the way that she begets her child Horus from her dead husband Osiris, mythical detail which no doubt draws attention to her mastery of life in creating it and resurrecting the dead. The pairing of divine mother and son, of Hathor and Ihi, and Isis and Horus, has been prevalent in the religion of Egypt millennia before Christianity's adoption of this age-old subject. Even after the patriarchal solar theory supplants the stellar and lunar variants as the dominant cosmogony, the matriarchal viewpoint of the heavens survives in Dendera and Philae in Upper Egypt, and it is during the Ptolemaic period that the image of Isis becomes cosmopolitan, having her mighty name echoed through the Mediterranean world as she of innumerable names. Despite the fact that her worship officially ends in 551 CE, she passes on all her attributes to the Virgin Mary, a remolded cultural canon of the Great Mother Goddess, who continues to spur the living cosmos from lower elementary phases of development to higher and supreme forms of spiritual transformation. And on that note, I will see you next time.